I'm about to prove that everything you think you know about history is wrong. These aren't just coincidences, they're impossible mathematical anomalies that shouldn't exist. And by the end of this video, you'll question whether free will is even real. The wrong turn that started a world war. You probably think wars start because of politics, economics, or ideology. That's ridiculous. A driver gets lost, makes an illegal U-turn, and 17 million people die. But here's the disturbing evidence. June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary is making his final public appearance in Sarajevo. 6 assassins are scattered throughout the crowd, armed and waiting. But wait, it gets more impossible. The temperature that morning was exactly 78 degrees, perfect weather for keeping windows down in the motorcade. If it had been raining, the car's roof would have been up, deflecting the fatal shots. The morning starts badly. Serbian nationalist Nedeljko Čabrinović hurls a bomb at the Archduke's motorcade, but it bounces off the folded roof and explodes under the wrong car. Here's what's insane. The bomb's 10-second fuse was exactly long enough to roll under the following vehicle. 1 second shorter, and it would have detonated directly under Franz Ferdinand. Franz Ferdinand survives and continues his schedule. Wait, it gets worse. Franz Ferdinand's driver, Leopold Leuschka, hadn't been told about a route change. But here's the impossible detail. Leuschka had been driving for the royal family for only 6 months. An experienced driver would have questioned the route. A veteran chauffeur would have known every street in Sarajevo. As they head back through the city, Leuschka goes straight down Franz Josef Street instead of turning toward the hospital. Officials realize the mistake and order him to stop and reverse. The car stalls directly in front of Schiller's Delicatessen. Here's where it gets impossible. 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip, one of the failed conspirators, had given up and stopped at that exact corner to buy a sandwich. But get this. Princip had been standing on a different corner entirely. He moved to Schiller's corner only because he was hungry, and it was the only food vendor still open after the morning's chaos. His co-conspirator, Trifko Grabej, was supposed to be positioned there, but had fled in panic after the first failed bombing. Finding himself 5 feet from his target in a stalled car, Princip draws his pistol. The gun had jammed during his morning attempt, but now fires perfectly twice. Both Franz Ferdinand and his wife die within minutes. So here's the uncomfortable question. Was this really random chance, or are we living in a simulation where someone's controlling the variables? The mathematical probability of all these factors aligning, the weather, the inexperienced driver, the route change, the stalled engine, the hungry assassin in the exact right place, is so astronomical it shouldn't be possible. The rejected artist who burned the world. You think massive historical tragedies have complex causes. Wrong. In 1907, a young man was rejected from art school. That rejection would cost 50 million lives. But wait, it gets more disturbing. Adolf Hitler was 18 when he applied to Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. Confident and arrogant, his portfolio filled with architectural sketches. But here's the impossible timing. The Academy had just changed its admission standards that exact year, emphasizing creative expression over technical skill. Under the previous year's criteria, Hitler would have been accepted. The board rejected him, saying his work lacked creative spark. He applied again the next year. They wouldn't even let him take the entrance exam. Here's what makes this cosmically cruel. The professor who led Hitler's rejection, Christian Griepenkerl, had just been appointed head of the painting department. His predecessor had been more lenient with technically proficient but uninspired work. Griepenkerl specifically wanted to revolutionize the academy by accepting only truly gifted artists. His high standards, implemented at the exact moment Hitler applied, changed the trajectory of human civilization. Here's the impossible part. Hitler's financial desperation coincided perfectly with Germany's political chaos. His father had died 3 years earlier. His mother was dying of breast cancer, and his orphan's pension barely covered survival in expensive Vienna. But here's what's insane. Hitler's mother died on December 21st, 1907, just months after his second rejection. The family doctor, Eduard Bloch, was Jewish. He tried desperately to save her, showing such compassion that Hitler called him a noble Jew and later protected him during the Holocaust. The irony is staggering. A Jewish doctor's kindness was one of the few bright spots in Hitler's darkest period. Sleeping in homeless shelters, he absorbed the anti-Semitic rhetoric flooding the city's political scene. The timing was catastrophically perfect. Germany was experiencing upheaval and national humiliation after World War I. Hitler's personal rejection had created exactly the kind of resentful demagogue that desperate times demand. So, answer this. If those art professors had accepted Hitler, would 50 million people still be alive? If Christian Griepenkel had maintained the old admission standards, if Hitler's mother had lived longer, if that Jewish doctor had been less compassionate, would the Holocaust have happened? Or was this rejection always meant to happen, part of some cosmic plan too horrible to comprehend? The fog that saved America? You believe America won independence through superior strategy and determination. That's laughable. George Washington's army was trapped, outnumbered 5-1, with nowhere to run. Then the impossible happened. Here's the evidence that should disturb you. August 29th, 1776. The Continental Army faces annihilation on Brooklyn Heights. 9,000 American soldiers are trapped against the East River by superior British forces. But wait, the impossible details are stacking up. General Howe had 20,000 troops positioned perfectly to crush the Americans. His plan was flawless, his execution precise. The Patriots had nowhere to run, no boats large enough for evacuation, and British warships controlling the harbor. If this army dies, the revolution dies with it. Washington begins the most desperate evacuation in military history. Every boat commandeered, fishing vessels, rowboats, ferry barges, anything that could float. Soldiers from Massachusetts, many of them experienced fishermen and sailors, rowed in frantic relays across treacherous water. But here's the impossible timing. The tide was perfect for rowing, the wind was calm enough for small boats, and the moon was dark enough to hide their movement. Change any one of these variables and the evacuation fails. But as dawn approaches, thousands are still exposed on the Brooklyn shore. You can almost hear the British sentries stirring, smell the gunpowder being prepared, feel the tension as sunrise creeps closer. British sentries will spot them at first light and Howe's cannons will create a massacre. The revolution will end in blood-soaked water. Then something impossible occurs. A thick, impenetrable fog rolls in from the harbor just as the sun rises. But get this, meteorologists say fog that dense at sunrise is virtually impossible given the weather conditions that night. The temperature differential, humidity, and wind patterns shouldn't have produced such perfect cover. For 6 crucial hours, this meteorological miracle provides perfect cover. The last Continental soldiers disappear into the mist, just as the fog lifts with supernatural precision. But here's what keeps me awake at night. What are the odds that weather would intervene at that exact moment? British soldiers later reported they could hear voices and movement from the water, but couldn't see anything. Some claimed they saw ghostly figures in the mist. Are we supposed to believe nature just decided to pick a side, or was this divine intervention disguised as weather? The moldy mistake that saved millions. You think medical breakthroughs come from careful research and planning? Ridiculous. Alexander Fleming went on vacation and forgot to clean his lab. That sloppiness became history's greatest medical breakthrough. The disturbing truth? September 1928. Fleming was notoriously messy. Colleagues constantly criticized his chaotic habits. But here's the impossible detail. Fleming's lab was on the 2nd floor of St. Mary's Hospital, and he always kept his window open despite hospital regulations. The building's ventilation system was designed to prevent contamination, but Fleming ignored all protocols. Before his 2-week holiday, he stacked bacterial culture plates on his bench and walked away, leaving his window open as usual. Wait, this gets impossible. A spore of Penicillium notatum drifted through that window and landed on Fleming's abandoned Staphylococcus culture. But here's what defies belief. That exact strain of penicillium was incredibly rare. It came from the mycology lab 1 floor below, where researcher Latouche was studying fungi. On the exact day Fleming left for vacation, Latouche opened his window to clean his lab, releasing spores into the London air. The wind direction, air currents through the building, and atmospheric pressure had to align perfectly for that spore to reach Fleming's lab. London's weather during his absence created perfect conditions. Cool nights let the mold establish itself. Warm days helped it spread and produce antibiotic compounds. But meteorological records show this was the only 2-week period that summer with such ideal temperature fluctuations. 1 degree warmer and the mold would have died. 1 degree cooler and it wouldn't have produced enough antibiotic compounds to be visible. When Fleming returned, instead of throwing away the contaminated plates like any normal scientist, he noticed something extraordinary. Around the mold growth, bacteria had completely disappeared, forming a perfect clear zone. But here's the kicker. Fleming almost discarded the plate. His lab assistant had already cleaned most of the contaminated cultures. This particular dish was saved only because it was buried under papers on Fleming's desk. So here's the question that haunts me. What are the mathematical odds of the right spore from the right lab, landing in the right place, with the right weather conditions, observed by the one scientist messy enough to see the miracle? The probability is so small it approaches 0. Are coincidences this perfect even possible, or was humanity always meant to discover this life-saving medicine exactly when we did? The divine winds that defied an empire. You think the military might determine historical outcomes? Wrong. Twice the most powerful empire on earth tried to conquer Japan, twice the weather had other plans. Here's the disturbing pattern. Kublai Khan ruled the largest empire in human history, stretching from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. By 1274, only Japan remained unconquered. He assembled 900 ships carrying 23,000 Mongol and Korean troops, a floating city of war dwarfing every previous naval operation. But here's the impossible detail. Khan had consulted Chinese weather experts who assured him the typhoon season had ended. The invasion was timed for optimal conditions. The Mongols land and immediately demonstrate why they'd conquered most of the known world. Their composite bows, superior cavalry tactics, and coordinated formations overwhelm individual samurai honor codes. Japanese defeat seems inevitable. The Mongols establish beachheads, burn coastal towns, and begin their systematic conquest. Then a massive typhoon roars across the East China Sea with devastating force. But wait, this storm appeared with 0 warning. No weather signs, no atmospheric changes that medieval observers could detect. The Mongol fleet, anchored in Hakata Bay, is completely destroyed. Ships are hurled onto shore like toys. Thousands of warriors drown in churning waters. But wait. 7 years later, Khan launches an even bigger assault. 4,400 ships, 140,000 troops. The largest amphibious invasion until D-Day, 6 centuries later. This time, Khan waited for perfect weather conditions, consulted multiple weather experts, and planned the invasion during the calmest season. Again, the Mongols establish beachheads and begin systematic conquest. Japanese resistance seems futile against superior numbers and tactics. And again, at the moment of Japan's greatest peril, a typhoon strikes with supernatural timing. But this second storm was even more impossible. It lasted exactly long enough to destroy the Mongol fleet but cleared immediately afterward, allowing Japanese survivors to collect enemy weapons and supplies. Weather records suggest both storms were unprecedented in their timing, intensity, and precision. So explain this to me. What are the odds of 2 massive storms appearing at exactly the right moments to save the same nation? The Japanese called them kamikaze, divine wind, and believed their gods had personally intervened. Meteorological analysis suggests storms of this magnitude during these seasons should occur once every 1,000 years. 2 in 7 years? The mathematical probability is essentially 0. Were the Japanese wrong about divine intervention, or were they the only ones paying attention to the obvious? The storm that created a nation. You assume America's character was shaped by careful planning and noble intentions. Absurd. The Mayflower was headed for Virginia. A storm had different plans. The evidence is unsettling. November 9th, 1620. After 66 grueling days at sea, the Mayflower's 102 passengers desperately wanted to reach their authorized destination, Virginia, where they had legal permits from the Virginia Company, detailed maps, and specific settlement instructions. But here's the impossible timing. They were just 2 days away from reaching the Hudson River when the storm hit. But the North Atlantic seized the ship and drove it relentlessly northward. Captain Christopher Jones, an experienced navigator who had made this crossing multiple times, fought howling winds and massive swells trying to reach Virginia's rivers. The storm was unrelenting, pushing them hundreds of miles from their intended destination. But here's what's insane. The storm followed them. Every time Jones tried to turn south, the winds intensified. When he attempted to wait it out, the weather worsened. It was as if nature itself was steering them toward a different destiny. Maritime records show storms that are persistent and directionally consistent are virtually impossible. Weather systems move and dissipate. They don't maintain the same course for days while increasing in intensity. When weather finally broke, they found themselves off Cape Cod with no legal authority, no maps, no local knowledge. Jones attempted to sail south toward their proper destination, but dangerous shoals and continuing rough seas made the journey impossible. With winter approaching, supplies running dangerously low, and crew threatening mutiny, they anchored in Provincetown Harbor. This accidental landing changed everything. In Virginia, they'd have joined Jamestown's established Anglican colony with royal governance, tobacco economy, and religious conformity. The Pilgrims would have become just another group of settlers in an existing system. Instead, they found themselves in uncharted territory, forced to create the Mayflower Compact and principles of self-governance that became cornerstones of American democracy. But here's the detail that defies explanation. The exact spot they landed had been abandoned by the Patuxet tribe just 4 years earlier due to a plague that killed 90% of the population. The cleared fields were ready for planting, fresh water sources were already established, and defensive positions had been prepared. It was as if the land had been prepared specifically for their arrival. Here's what terrifies me. If that storm hadn't blown them north, would America even exist as we know it? Would the concepts of religious freedom, democratic self-governance, and individual liberty have taken root in Royal Virginia? Or was this random weather event always meant to redirect the course of human civilization towards something greater than anyone could have planned? The sick day that saved D-Day. You believe major military operations succeed through superior planning and execution. Nonsense. The one day Erwin Rommel decided to visit his wife was the day the Allies chose to invade Europe. Here's the disturbing coincidence. June 5th, 1944. Field Marshal Rommel, the Desert Fox, had spent months fortifying the Atlantic Wall, 2-7, millions of mines, massive concrete bunkers, perfectly positioned panzer divisions. He was Germany's finest defensive strategist, the one man Hitler trusted completely to repel the invasion. But here's the impossible timing. Rommel had originally planned to visit Lucy in May for their anniversary, but military preparations forced him to postpone. But Rommel hadn't seen his wife Lucy in months. Her birthday was June 6th, and she'd been begging him to visit. Weather reports showed terrible storms across the English Channel, 20-foot swells, howling winds, visibility near zero. No major amphibious operation seemed possible. Even Rommel's meteorologists confirmed invasion conditions would be impossible for at least a week. So Rommel departed for Germany to surprise Lucy with handmade shoes from Paris, a silk scarf from Lyon, and her favorite chocolates. The timing seemed perfect. But here's what's insane. Rommel left his post at the exact moment when German weather stations experienced equipment failures. The atmospheric readings that might have detected improving conditions went dark just as he departed. Except Eisenhower, receiving different weather intelligence from British stations, saw a narrow window of opportunity. Despite terrible conditions, despite his meteorologists' warnings, despite the enormous risk, D-Day began at dawn on June 6th, D-Day, exactly as Rommel was 400 miles away presenting birthday gifts. Without Rommel's tactical genius, the German response was catastrophic. Panzer divisions sat motionless, awaiting orders that never came, because the communication systems Rommel had established required his personal authorization codes. His second-in-command, General Dolman, was conducting a war game exercise in Rennes. The third-ranking officer was on leave in Berlin. It was as if the entire German command structure had spontaneously collapsed at the precise moment the Allies attacked. But here's the detail that haunts military historians. When Rommel finally received word of the invasion and raced back to Normandy, his staff car broke down twice. The Desert Fox, who had never experienced mechanical problems in North Africa, was delayed by engine failure and a flat tire. By the time he reached his headquarters, crucial counterattack windows had closed. So tell me, what are the odds that history's most important birthday party would coincide perfectly with weather equipment failures, communication breakdowns, and mechanical problems that prevented Germany's best general from defending Hitler's Atlantic Wall? Are we really supposed to call this chance? Or was D-Day always meant to succeed regardless of German preparations? The man who almost ended the world. You trust that nuclear war was prevented by careful diplomacy and rational leadership. Terrifying misconception. On September 26, 1983, one Soviet officer's decision not to push a button saved human civilization. The evidence should chill you. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov wasn't supposed to be working that night. He was filling in for a colleague who had called in sick with food poisoning from the base cafeteria. At the Serpukhov 15 bunker, a top-secret facility monitoring early warning satellites, Petrov was the only officer on duty with authority to report incoming attacks directly to Moscow. At precisely past midnight, computers began screaming warnings of incoming American missiles. But here's the impossible chain of events. The satellite system had been upgraded just weeks earlier, with new software designed to eliminate false positives. The irony is staggering. Technology meant to prevent mistakes nearly caused the ultimate mistake. The malfunction occurred when sunlight reflected off high-altitude clouds created heat signatures identical to missile launches. But clouds at that altitude, with that reflective capacity, occur maybe once a decade. The software upgrade, the rare atmospheric conditions, and Petrov's unexpected shift created a perfect storm of near annihilation. Every protocol demanded Petrov immediately report the attack, triggering Soviet retaliation before American warheads arrived. Nuclear doctrine was clear: launch on warning or risk annihilation. The red phone was in his hand. Moscow was waiting. Soviet missiles were ready to launch within minutes. But something felt wrong. His training said America would send hundreds of missiles in a first strike, not just 5. A limited attack made no strategic sense. But here's what's terrifying. Petrov's decision wasn't based on logic alone. He later said he had a funny feeling in his stomach that the alert was false. Humanity's survival came down to one man's intestinal discomfort. Despite computer certainty, flashing alarms, and protocols demanding immediate action, Petrov made history's most important decision. He classified it as a false alarm and refused to report it. For 23 agonizing minutes, Petrov sat, while equipment insisted nuclear war had begun. His career, freedom, possibly his life hung in the balance. If missiles had actually been launched, the Soviet Union would have been destroyed while their weapons sat unused. Here's what keeps me awake. The timing was impossibly perfect for disaster. President Reagan had just announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, heightening Soviet paranoia. Tensions were at Cold War peaks. The Kremlin was convinced America was planning a first strike. Any other officer, on any other night, would have followed protocol and ended civilization. Here's the question that haunts me. Why was the one person willing to trust intuition over training working that exact shift? What if his colleague hadn't gotten food poisoning? What if different software had been installed? Is human survival really this fragile, balanced on a single person's gut feeling and a case of bad fish? The broken radio that revealed the universe. You assume scientific breakthroughs result from methodical research towards specific goals. Completely wrong. 2 scientists couldn't get rid of an annoying hum. That hum was the echo of creation itself. The disturbing truth about discovery. 1965. Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson were using a massive 20-foot horn-shaped antenna at Bell Telephone Laboratories to measure radio waves from our galaxy. The instrument was extraordinarily sensitive, designed to detect the faintest signals from space. But persistent background noise was ruining their measurements, a steady hissing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. For months, they tried eliminating this maddening interference. They recalibrated equipment, checked every connection, tested every component, even suspected sabotage. The noise remained constant, uniform, inexplicable. Growing desperate, they looked for external sources. Maybe New York radio interference, though the signal seemed too uniform. Maybe nuclear weapons radiation, though the frequency was wrong. Then they noticed pigeons nesting inside their antenna. Surely these birds and their droppings were causing the problem. But here's the impossible detail. These weren't ordinary pigeons. They were a mated pair that had built their nest in the exact center of the antenna's focus point, the most acoustically sensitive location possible. Penzias and Wilson carefully removed the birds and spent days scrubbing away what they politely called white dielectric material. They were certain this would solve their problem. The hum persisted with identical intensity. Here's where it gets cosmically ironic. Unknown to them, just 37 miles away at Princeton University, physicist Robert Dicke was working on theoretical predictions that the universe should be filled with leftover radiation from the Big Bang, primordial energy detectable as faint microwave background permeating all of space. Dicke had calculated the exact frequency and intensity of this cosmic background radiation. His predictions matched the Bell Labs interference perfectly. But here's the timing that defies belief. Dicke was scheduled to build his own antenna to search for this cosmic background radiation. Construction was set to begin the following month. If the Bell Labs scientists had solved their interference problem and published their galaxy measurements, Dicke might never have made the connection. When Dicke learned about their interference problem, he realized they'd accidentally discovered the most important evidence for Big Bang theory. That annoying hum wasn't interference. It was the afterglow of creation itself. The fading echo of the moment when space and time began 13.8 billion years ago. So here's what keeps me awake. What are the odds that two frustrated engineers trying to eliminate noise would accidentally prove how the universe began? That pigeons would nest in exactly the right spot to confuse them? That theoretical predictions would align perfectly with accidental discovery? Is this level of coincidence mathematically possible, or are we living in a universe that wants to be understood? The letter that never arrived. You believe Pearl Harbor happened due to intelligence failures and strategic miscalculations. Dead wrong. A telegraph warning of Pearl Harbor sat undelivered in a Honolulu office as bombs began falling. Here's the final piece of disturbing evidence. December 7th, 1941. General George Marshall reviewed disturbing intelligence reports. AT. Intercepted Japanese communications revealed Tokyo was breaking off negotiations with the United States. The Purple Code intercepts were crystal clear. Japan was preparing for war. Marshall drafted urgent warnings to all Pacific commanders, including Lieutenant General Walter Short in Hawaii. But here's the impossible timing. Marshall's warning was delayed by exactly the amount of time needed for it to become useless. The message was dispatched to Western Union at precisely 11:30 a.m. Washington time. Under normal circumstances, it would reach Pearl Harbor within minutes via the Army's secure radio network. But atmospheric conditions over the Pacific were unusually turbulent that Sunday morning. Solar activity was creating massive interference with long-distance transmissions, making secure military communications impossible. But here's what's insane. These solar flares were the most intense recorded in decades, occurring at the exact moment when America needed communications most. Army operators tried repeatedly to reach Hawaii, but couldn't establish a clear connection. Growing frustrated with delays, they made a fateful decision, routing Marshall's warning through Western Union's commercial telegraph system. The message arrived at RCA's Honolulu office at 7:33 a.m. local time, just as the sun was rising over Oahu. It should have been delivered immediately to Pearl Harbor, 20 minutes away. But it was Sunday morning, and RCA's delivery staff was working with a skeleton crew. The telegram was placed in a stack of routine messages. But here's the detail that makes this cosmically cruel. The regular delivery motorcycle had broken down that morning. The backup bicycle messenger was a teenager named Tadao Fuchikami, who didn't realize the message's urgency. At 7:55 a.m., the first wave of Japanese dive bombers began their attack on Pearl Harbor. 20 minutes later, young Fuchikami finally departed RCA's office with General Marshall's warning telegram in his bag, pedaling through smoke and chaos toward a naval base already in flames. Japanese Zeros strafed the roads. Bombs exploded around him. The kid kept pedaling, determined to deliver his message, unaware he was racing through the attack he'd been sent to prevent. The message that might have saved the Pacific Fleet and prevented America's catastrophic unpreparedness arrived at Pearl Harbor at 11:45 a.m., nearly 4 hours after the attack began. By then, 2,400 Americans were dead, 18 ships were sunk or damaged, and America's isolationist era had ended forever. But here's the detail that haunts me. If that message had arrived on time, If the solar flares hadn't disrupted communications, if the motorcycle hadn't broken down, would America have been prepared for Pearl Harbor? Would we have entered World War II differently? Or would Japan have simply chosen a different target, a different day, ensuring America's entry into the war happened exactly as fate intended? So here's the final uncomfortable question that will keep you awake tonight. If these impossible coincidences shaped our entire world, what coincidences are happening right now that will determine your future? And more importantly, if history is really just a series of impossibly perfect accidents, does free will even exist? Or are we all just following a script written by forces we can't see, playing out roles in a cosmic drama where every random event serves a purpose we're not meant to understand? Comment below if you think I'm wrong. But deep down, you know these patterns are too perfect to be random. The mathematics don't lie. The timing is too precise. The consequences are too monumental. We're either living in the most impossibly lucky universe ever created, or something is pulling strings we can't see. And that terrifies me more than any war, plague, or disaster ever could.